Hey everyone, I've decided to do a review for you guys and give you something to do during the hurricane and stuff. If nothing else, and plus it'll keep you updated and everything. To start off with social structure, and then from social structure we go into a few of the review questions. Not all of them, guys. There's a lot of review questions, but I go to a few of the major ones. So take a look at those, and I hope this helps you some if you got it. And I hope everybody came through okay on the hurricane and with the flooding and everything. And y'all take care. And if you got any questions, just let me know. I can answer them quick as I can. And got most of the grading done. I still have to enter the test scores. I just got to upload them. And but I've been a little busy here lately. But anyway, guys, we're starting off talking with social structure, like I said. And the big thing with social structure, guys, is just remember it's different for every Greek city-state because there really wasn't one united Greece. Each city-state was independent, so each structure would vary from each social structure would vary from place to place, city-state to city-state. The two we really talk about in the review we're getting ready to do is Athens and Sparta. So take a look at it, and I hope it helps you guys. Hey, we're going to talk real quick about this concept of social class in Athens. And you see a quick overview of the class structure there. Now remember, the top class in Athens is called the Polites. And these are the uppermost class. These are the Athenian citizens, the very, very small fraction of the population that could vote. Out of a population of 300,000, Polites would only make up roughly 50,000. Below the upper class comes the metics, who are the merchants, the people who do a lot of the work. They possess some property, but they cannot vote. They can never be citizens because they were not born of an Athenian father and mother. Below the metics are the freedmen. These are the former slaves. These are your laborers. These are the ones who work for the metics. And these are the ones who are your farmers, or your people who work at the docks. When you think about it, it's these freedmen and the metics that made it a good portion of the population. They both have property. They both could move around freely. The metics actually at times could be actually kind of wealthy, but they could never vote. They had no interest in Greek politics because they were not citizens. They could try to influence the Polites and get them to vote a certain way because they did know them and interact with them, but they never had any rights as a citizen in Athens. And so no matter how much money you earned as a metic, you were still a metic, and you could not vote, you could not hold any rights in Athenian society. Now, below the freedmen, remember, freedmen were former slaves who were freed, were actually the slaves. So below the freedmen, you had slaves, and they had absolutely no right. They could be beaten. They could be no rights whatsoever. But the thing with slaves in Athens is that you could buy your way out of slavery. And, most of the slaves were non-Greek, where they were captured in battle from other civilizations, and they were non-Greek. A slave was not allowed to defend himself against his master, and they were at the complete bottom of the social scale. I include women in talking on the social hierarchy in Athens, because women in Greek society had little to no rights. You couldn't leave the house without a male escort. You were considered a ward of a male at all times, no matter how old you are. You were never, as a woman, allowed to have any rights. Now, if you think about it and contrast this to Spartan women, it's ironic that Spartan women, as compared to Athenian women, Spartan women had so much more rights and so much more freedom. And this wasn't caused necessarily that the Spartans were enlightened, but this was just the reality of Spartan society. Spartan women were the only ones at home. Men trained for battle, they fought, they lived in separate barracks. So women in Spartan society had a lot more freedom, a lot more respect than what you saw in Athenian society. Now, Spartan also had social classes. The top were the Persoria, and I can't really say that correctly, but they were the Spartans who were served in the army. They were paid a tax, and they were Spartans. They were the ones who were born of two or Spartan parents, who were trained in the ways of the military, served in the army. And they also had a middle class, and this middle class were like the businessmen who supplied the needs of the Spartan and sold things and did other work that the Spartans themselves did not do. And finally, they had a slave class as well. This slave class is known as the Helots. If you remember, they had less rights than slaves. There was no way these Helots ever got out of slavery. And this is in contrast to what we saw in Athens, where a slave could actually at some point purchase their freedom. In Sparta, a slave would never be able to purchase his freedom. You remember, they lived in constant fear of rebellion from these Helots. And so a Helot, or the lowest class in Spartans, could never even hope to have their freedom. All right, now we're going to do the review questions, and these are not all the review questions. Like I said, these are like some of the review questions and everything. And so that's my dog. And so just look over them, and like I said, they're not all, but they are some of the main ones. And so this is just don't focus on the ones on the review. Just make sure that you look at the ones in the module as well at the very bottom. All right, let's talk about a couple of the questions now that we have on the review section. And the first that we're going to talk about is basically the Athenian versus U.S. democracy. And basically, one's a direct and one's an indirect. And you should know at this point what those things mean. But it's not just about the direct versus indirect. If you remember, we also talked about the difference in the size of our democracy versus that of the Athenian democracy. Our democracy is a very large democracy, millions of people. The Athenian democracy was a much more smaller democracy. Okay? And not only smaller in terms of the number of people who were living there, but smaller in terms of the number of people who were considered citizens. Basically, in the U.S., it's easy to become a citizen pretty much. A lot of us, the vast majority of our population, are citizens. But if you look back in the direct democracy of Athens, only 50,000 out of 300,000 were citizens and were entitled to the protection and the rights of a citizen. That is huge. Huge difference. Now, one thing that you got to think about is that the smaller democracy is, the more personal it is. You remember that statement that we talked about that Pericles said? And basically he said that if you didn't take an interest in politics, you were considered useless. Not harmless, but useless is what he said. Can we still think about somebody in our society, in our democracy, who takes no interest in politics in that manner? No, we don't. Why? Well, probably the most reason for that is that in Athenian democracy, it was a much more smaller democracy, more intimate democracy, let's say. 50,000 people is not that big. And so you can hold people more responsibly to their duties in that democracy. Whereas in our democracy, it's a much larger democracy. And it's hard to hold individuals to that level of responsibility. And so that's things you need to think about in regards to the compare and contrast of the different, two different types of democracy. And that's an important question you will need to know. All right, now as far as this review question goes, how does basically Greek afterlife compare with that of the other civilizations? Just remember, for Greek afterlife, the only chance you had to get into the Elysian fields was you had to be at the upper class. It led most Greeks to, unless you were the upper class, it led most Greeks to have a negative view of the afterlife. And basically enjoying life. Greeks were known for their love of life. And it comes from this view that you're not getting to the good place anyway, so you might as well enjoy what you have. Greeks use oracles to speak with their gods, remember, and Greek leaders will often consult with these oracles. Oracles are usually humans who supposedly could talk to the Greek gods and give advice to the people who asked the question. Three defining characteristics of Greek art, guys. Remember, A, realistic. They showed movement realistically. B, they were very idealistic. Every Greek statue of a guy had a six-pack ab, and not every Greek had a six-pack ab. What that essentially means, that was the ideal form of the human body they showed. The third characteristic is that Greeks showed movement superior. Their artwork could show movement, even if it was a statue. It looked like they were struggling, they were moving. That was a third defining characteristic, and it's really different from any other set of art we've seen. We've not seen, except maybe in China, art developed to this point where movement can be shown through how the muscles are flexed. And you remember those different pictures we saw. Okay, so we're going to talk about right now the Persian Wars. And basically, if you remember, what started them was that the Ionian colonies were conquered by the Persians, and then the Ionians revolted. Now, who came to their help? The Ionian city-state, which was what? You got it, Athens. Now, why didn't Sparta help? Well, remember, Spartans were the big bad Dorians. They didn't want to have anything to do with the Athenians or the Ionians in their war with Persia. The First Persian War, Sparta took a back seat, and Greek essentially thought this war on their own. What were the consequences of the First Persian War? The consequences of the First Persian War that A, Athenians built a bigger, stronger navy. B, Athens starts to rise to become the greatest city-state in Greece. Now, the Second Persian War happened when Xerxes attacks attacks Greece. He's heading straight for Athens. Sparta takes a little better stand. They try to help out Athens and the rest of Greece. You remember to stand at the 300 at Thermopylae. And but more importantly, what was the consequence of Athens and Greece's victory of the Second Persian War? The consequence, guys, is that A, Athens became the leading power in Greece. Okay, from this leading power, they formed the Peloponnesian League, which we talked about, which would then become an Athenian empire. The second consequence, or the third consequence, I lost count there. The next consequence is that Sparta would resent this, form the Delian League, which was specifically formed to oppose Athens. And eventually, the major consequence of the Greek victory of the Persian War would be the eventually Peloponnesian War that would occur between Athens and Sparta. Now, remember before the Peloponnesian War, like I mentioned, Athens and Sparta had two separate leagues, two separate alliance systems facing off. It was not only two separate alliance systems, remember the Delian versus the Peloponnesian League, it was also two separate forms of government, direct democracy versus oligarchy, and two separate, really, ethnic backgrounds, Ionian versus Dorian. This was an all-out war, and these group of people did not like each other. Now, we discussed in class, if you remember, another period in U.S. history, not U.S. history, but world history, when the world, or the then-known world, was divided between two groups. You remember that? We were talking about when it was divided between the Warsaw Pact and NATO during the Cold War. Now, what were the consequences of the Peloponnesian War? Well, basically, the Peloponnesian War took over 20-some years to complete. We discussed the impact of a 20-year war, draining population, loss of economic structure. You're left vulnerable to invasion, and that's what happened. King Philip of Mesopotamia came in. You remember the song, Mesopotamia? That's a pretty cool song. But anyway, King Philip of Mesopotamia came in, took over Greece. For the first time, Greece was united under one ruler. His son, who was
Alexander the Great would eventually go on and take over Persia, and then the rest of the then known world. But the overall, guys, you think about war has consequences. Some are positive, most are negative. And when you go to war, just because you win a war doesn't mean you actually won, does it? If you think about this, what we talked about over in class, because this is a quick summary, remember, Athens and Sparta fought the Peloponnesian War, but did either one of them really win? I mean, when you look at it, Sparta, where's that today? It's a bunch of ruins. Could Sparta hold on to his victory? No. Soon after the victory over Athens, things started falling apart for Sparta. Was there really a winner in that war? And the answer would be no, because both sides were so depleted, so drained, that they could no longer really function to the level they really were. They were no longer great. And so we got one more question after this, and then we'll be done. Now, the last question is fairly simple, guys. Just be able to compare and contrast the different periods, Dark Ages, Archaic period, Classical, Hellenistic. Be able just to, if I ask you to compare the two, just be able to do it. That's fairly simple. Thank you, guys. And, I'm not going to go into detail on that, but you can just look in your notes and make sure you're able to do that, because we've had some issues with that on a few prior tests. Hey, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. And I hope everything goes well for you. If you got any questions, just put it on Canvas and I'll do what I can to get to you. But basically, guys, all this is in the review. I got more questions. This does not contain all the questions you need to review, but I did pick out a few just to get your memory going. And I hope everybody's safe during the flooding and everything. And if you need anything, just let me know, guys, and I'll be posting maybe another one or two over the next couple of days if I get a chance. Y'all take care, and I'll talk to you later. Have a great day. And, oh, by the way, this is Abby. Let me show you my doggy real quick. Hold on. That's my doggy, Abby. Say hey. Say hey. See, that's my doggy. Her name was Abby. And, anyway, she wanted to be on screen, too. Y'all take care now. Bye-bye.